Our first speaker is Jordan Barry, who I'm going to introduce right now. Jordan Barry is the John B. Milken Professor of Law and Taxation at the University of Southern California Gould School of Law. He teaches and writes in the areas of antitrust, finance, law and economics, among other areas. He's also taught at University of Michigan, University of San Diego, and Berkeley Schools of Law, authored numerous scholarly articles, including the article that you're about to hear about today, which is going to appear in the Iowa Law Review with Professor John Hatfield and Will Freed, who's also going to be in our Q&A session today. Before he was a professor, he practiced in the New York office of Fried Frank and clerked for the Honorable J. Bybee of the Court of Appeals of the Ninth Circuit, graduated from Cornell and Stanford Law School, where he served as the managing editor of the Stanford Law Review. Welcome, Professor Barry.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I think I don't need this. Well, thank you for that very warm welcome. I always sound much more impressive in my bio than when I actually start talking. I should probably sit back down right now. Thank you, Prentice, for organizing today. You did so much great work. I highly recommend co-organizing with Prentice. He did almost all the work for this conference, which was great for me. So thank you, Prentice. Oh, I got a nice echo. This will be fun. I sound better the second time. I'm going to present a little bit about kind of setting the table today. I'm going to talk about the NAR settlement, and in particular, the role that steering plays in keeping commissions high and how the settlement will affect this. Only my name is on these slides, but I should be clear that these slides basically they're strongly related to a set of slides that my co-authors and I put together. That's Will Freed and John Hatfield as well. They'll be up here later today. And the larger set of these slides is available online if you're interested. Okay, so the big question here is, will this settlement bring down real estate commissions? Like, that's kind of the million, or actually tens of billions of dollar questions, as it turns out. So the short answer I'm going to tell you now is probably not much. So my talk for today, I'm going to start with a little background on the industry. I'm going to explain briefly how commissions are high and that steering is a key reason why they're high. And then I'm going to talk about what a successful settlement needs to do to kind of fix that problem. And from there, I'm going to talk about whether this actual settlement delivers and how it could be a bit better. The short answer is that some of the provisions are symbolic, others have more promise, but need a little bit more behind them to make them really work well. And I'll talk about how that could be accomplished either through settlement itself or through extra action by regulators and other interested parties. So starting with context on the industry a little bit, the market structure here, the big starting point is that US commissions are high. If you compare them to other developed countries, they tend to have much lower commission rates for real estate. If you look at like the UK, the Netherlands, Australia, we're looking more like 1.5% to 2.5% versus 5.5% to 6% in the United States. So significantly different there. And US commissions don't drop when the market gets quiet. They don't go down much for very expensive homes. So they look sort of very non-responsive to sort of the market forces you might expect. So one other thing to keep in mind is that listing agents and buyer agents, they like high commissions. That's something they both want to keep high. They're on the same team for this sort of purpose. And in particular, the real estate industry is characterized by very strong norms of behavior. The reason for this is that if you want to be a successful real estate agent, sure, you compete with your other real estate agents to get listings, to get buyer clients, but you also have to work together. If you're representing the seller, you're a listing agent, you want other agents to bring their buyers to look at your homes. That's how you get a deal done. That's how you get paid. Meanwhile, if you're a buyer agent, you want other agents to take your buyer clients' offers seriously, to let you come see the house, things like that. So if your other rival agents hate you and don't want to work with you, it's going to be a problem for you and your business. Everybody wants to get along. Everyone's interdependent. And because you're interdependent, that gives the community a lot of tools with which to enforce informal rules and to punish people who break those rules and make the rules stronger. So, for example, in the different housing market in the United States, each market has like a very one or at most two basically common commission rates in that market at which the overwhelming majority of deals get done. Okay, so upshot from this slide, the big takeaway is agents want commissions to be high and they have tools to keep commissions high because of these interdependence and norms of these. So let's talk a little bit more about the players and the incentives in the industry here. I'll talk about buyers first, then buyer agents, then we'll switch over to sellers and their agents, the listing agents. And the big picture, just to kind of roadmap it for you in advance, is that the way the industry is structured, it can often be hard to see who really bears the cost of agent commissions. I mean, commissions are basically the money that goes to the agents is money that the buyer pays that the seller doesn't get. So either the buyer is paying more or the seller is getting less or some combination of those two things, but it's not exactly clear which of those and at what times, and costs a bit of the sellers of these agents' commissions. And on top of that, this kind of reduces incentives, especially on the buyer side, to push for lower commissions. This helps keep commissions high. So let's stick with the buyers a minute more. When you have an agent and you're a buyer and you have an agent helping you, the buyer, when this deal closes, that buyer's agent will get X% of the closing price, 3%, 2.5%, whatever. It's called cooperating compensation. So the sellers are setting the price, the fees for the buyer agents. So if you're a buyer agent, you don't have to, it sort of seems like your agent's free. It's not free, but you don't have to think about it. You don't have to talk about it with your agent. You don't have to cut them a check. It sort of happens on the back end, out of sight, on the seller side. You don't have to worry about it. And importantly, if you get your agent to give you a lower fee or negotiate a lower fee or find a cheaper buyer agent or don't get an agent at all, any savings don't go to you. They go to the seller or the listing agent or some combination of those things. So you have no incentive to police the agent fee on your side most of the time. I will say as a small asterisk, you could ask for a rebate, but sometimes that's illegal and it's very rare in practice. And if you want to talk about that, we can, but I'm going to skip it for now because it's pretty rare in practice. So what about the buyer agents? What are their incentives? Well, they're required to serve their clients' interests and put them above their own interests. That's a NAR rule, and many states have that rule as a matter of law as well. You're a fiduciary, but you have a direct incentive as a buyer's agent to steer your client away from low commission properties. This is pretty straightforward. If your buyer buys a home with a 1% commission, you get a 1% commission. They buy a home with a 3% commission, you get triple that. So that's your paycheck. That's a pretty strong incentive right there. And at the same time, this is pretty doable. For one reason, as I said before, the commission rates tend to cluster very strongly. So it's not like you have to weed out 1 million listings. If you have 10 listings you're going to send your client, maybe 1 or 2 of them is low. So then you can just send them 8 or 9. That's still quite a lot to send them over. They might not even notice. That's sort of one example of the way this is doable. And if you talk about really low commissions, like below 2% commissions, less than 1% of the market pretty much everywhere in the country. And as you get lower, they get even increasingly rare, and so forth. On top of that, there's a number of ways in which you can steer. You could just sort of not send your clients listings. That's one possibility that are low. If the client sends you listings saying, I want to see these 10 houses, I couldn't get a hold of one of the sellers or they were hard to schedule with or whatever. Oh, it's off the market now. And you got 9 listings that 10 they asked for. They're not going to assume that you had a bad reason for the one you didn't get. It's a plausible story. Or you can take them to see the house and then say, oh, I don't think this house is good. I think there's a problem here. This area has a lot of issues, et cetera. And if you're a buyer worried about agency costs at all, usually your thought is that, well, the agent wants me to buy something to close the deal. If they're telling me I shouldn't buy it, I should take that really seriously. So that can be a very effective technique. And this is also low risk for an agent. The chances of getting caught are very low. The buyer doesn't know what you didn't send them or why. So it's hardly likely that your client is going to notice you did this. And as far as I've been able to tell, no agent has ever been disciplined by a regulatory body for commission-based steering. Regulators it's hard to detect this stuff and they're busy and they have limited resources. So as far as I'm aware, this hasn't happened. And look, this is a thing that does happen. This is not just hypothetical. Here are some example calls we have Jack Ryan here and also Will Fried as well from Rex Real Estate, formerly for Will. And here are actual calls in which buyer agents call to learn about their commission structure and sort of what happens.
Thank you for calling Rex. This call may be recorded. Please.
No, in New York City.
Ooh, we're going the wrong way. I love technology. Let's do that. All right, one more time. Here we go.
Thank you for calling Rex. This call may be recorded. Please hold while we connect you to the next available Rex agent.
Connect with a dedicated Rex agent in your area today and see how much our local...
Thank you for calling Rex. This is Savag. How may I help you?
Hi, I'm a real estate agent in Orlando, and I have a buyer interested in a home that apparently is one of yours.
Okay.
And before I take the buyer there, I wanted to see if you will pay me a 3% commission as a buyer's agent.
So how we So how we operate is we don't put our properties on the MLS, and that removes the obligation from the seller to pay for a buyer's commission. So if your clients like the property, then they can offer whatever price you want to offer, and then they would have to add your commission on top of their offer price.
No, I'm not taking my buyer there unless the seller agrees to pay the commission, because that's the way it's done.
That's the way it's done on the MLS, but we have a different business model. So
I understand you have a different business model, but I don't. All right, will you agree to pay the 3%?
No, we don't pay this. We don't ask for the sellers to do that.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.
This is not an Orlando thing. Here's a similar story from New York.
No, in New York City, just for your information, that's not how it works in New York. I don't know how it works in California, wherever you guys are, but that's fine. If you are not offering any buyer's commission, then that's fine. I'm not going to show that. And you're probably going to run into the same issue with everybody here. But
so you're not going to show the property just because you don't have a specific guarantee?
Absolutely.
Commission? Okay.
Correct, yes.
Well, isn't it also your fiduciary responsibility, though, to still show the property if your buyer wants to see the property?
It really doesn't matter. I mean, look, I'm not going to get into semantics with you, because if you're not going to get anyone in New York who is going to bring you any buyers of theirs without
we've been doing it for over 5 years now, and
you're not doing it in New York, are you?
We are. That's
not in New York City. I don't believe that, because no.
And in terms of examples of agents saying the house is off the market, here's one for you real quick.
This is ridiculous. No, this is not fair. I'm not going to even show it. Okay. I'm just going to tell them it's not available.
All right. Have a good day.
Great. So that's the last one. You can turn off the repeating echo thing. Thank you. So Rex has reported they have hundreds of these recorded calls. And again, this is going to be an undercount of steering. This is people saying they're going to steer on a recorded line with the person they're steering against. So that's a pretty good lower bound for how often this sort of thing happens. All right. On the seller side of things, right, as I mentioned, sellers are setting cooperative compensation. They're figuring out what the buyer's agent will get paid. You might think they'd be inclined to pay very little. It's the other side of the deal. Why would you pay the other guy's agent to work against you? Well, remember, buyer agents steer is the concern. And if you're a seller, you know this and you don't like it. Like, this is bad news for you. As a result of steering, low commission listings are going to get less attention. And as we've shown in our paper, they take longer to sell. And they may not sell at all. They're much more likely to remain unsold. If you're a seller, you want to sell your home and you want to sell your home quickly and for a good price. This is all bad news for you. This is very strong pressure. Makes you want to offer a going rate commission, play ball, don't make waves, make it happen. And meanwhile, what about your listing agent if you're a seller? Well, they're on board with this. High commissions are good for them. They're listing agent today, but they could be a buying agent tomorrow. So, they're all on the same team in a sense. And in fact, if the seller is considering offering a lower commission, a lot of listing agents are actually trained. Tell your seller about steering. Warn them. Tell them this is a bad idea. And there are example hypothetical conversations and training materials that we found online and documented and so forth. There's a lot of videos you can watch on YouTube giving examples of how to do this. It's quite impressive. So, all right. What does settlement have to do to fix these problems? Well, there's sort of two things. One is you got to end steering. If steering is what's keeping commissions high, you got to fix that problem to let commissions come down. And secondly, we need to get agents negotiating with their buyers in particular, right? We need to get competitive pressures so that this is more like a regular market where people are, you price shop for roofers, you should price shop for buyers agents too. How do we do that? Well, on the steering front, you could try and deter it. You could say, well, we're going to go out and catch everyone who steers and punish them, but that's very unlikely to work because someone's got to go find them and punish them, and that's really hard to do, and no one has the incentive and the information to do it. So that seems like an unlikely scenario. A better idea seems like changing the market structure so that people don't have an incentive anymore to steer. And in particular, if it's not sellers setting buyer agent compensation, but buyers, you can really change the dynamic. Because the threat of steering works great against a seller, but not against a buyer. If you were negotiating with your agent and say, look, I want to pay you 2% instead of 3%. I say, well, fine, if you do that, I'm not going to give you as many homes to look at. I'm going to pick randomly and not send you all the houses. You're going to be like, I'm going to find another buyer agent. Have a great day. So that argument doesn't work against buyers in the same way. And this shift could really help. So as I said before, from a buyer perspective, the buyer agent can sort of seem like they're free because they don't pay directly. You need to change the system so that buyers are the ones setting their own agent's compensation. And in particular, They need to care about what that compensation is. The buyers need to be the ones who are kind of getting the benefit of any reduced commissions. They have an incentive to push for lower commissions and to price shop and negotiate. So does the proposed settlement do those things? There's sort of two main changes, putting aside the money aspect, but the actual changes to practice in the settlement. There are kind of two big ones that have gotten a lot of discussion. One is it prohibits sellers from posting buyer agent commission rates on the MLS itself. So that's just no cooperating competition, no cooperating commissions on the MLS. Okay. The second provision is that it requires buyer agents to enter into written agreements with their clients in advance before showing homes. So this provision, I think, has some potential promise, but has some open holes that have to be fixed. I'll talk about that second. Let's talk with the first one first. This provision about the MLS is really largely symbolic, and I don't think it's going to do much because it doesn't say you can't offer cooperating compensation. It just says you can't do it on the MLS. In the internet age, there are other ways to get this information out. Well, honestly, you could just call the seller and ask them. I mean, the buyer agent can just, when they set up the appointment to view the house, by the way, what's the commission? You know, it's not that big a reach. So I think this is not going to change much, but don't take my word for it. Let's hear what the president of NAR has to say. President Sears, we will prohibit the offer of cooperating compensation on the MLS. Please hear me clearly. You will still be able to offer compensation to a buyer broker. True, very true. It just cannot be conveyed on the MLS. And if there's one thing I know about members, they will figure out how to efficiently communicate the information to see if there will be any cooperating compensation. I agree. Or President of Real, Sharon Srivatsa. Real, by the way, in case you're not familiar, is a very large publicly traded brokerage. It's growing quickly, 16,000 agents. And he says steering is going to keep going. Steering is very normal, and steering is alive and kicking and is not going to go anywhere. Seller is going to offer compensation. Buyer's agent is going to find out what that compensation is, and the buyer's agent is going to advise or steer. Very normal. It's going to be just fine. And he says, look, the fixed payment commission is going to continue for this reason. The listing agent is going to advise the client to offer a cooperating commission, because if they don't, then they know they're going to be at a competitive disadvantage. That's the steering story right there. So don't take my word for it. It's not doing much. What about the language on buyer agency agreements? Well, it says you have to enter into a written agreement with your buyer, and it puts in some requirements what that agreement has to do. So in particular, it's got to specify how much, the amount or rate of compensation that the agent is going to get. And that amount can't be open-ended. It has to be objectively ascertainable and can't be open-ended. Not entirely clear what that means, but they give the example that just saying whatever amount the seller offers, what the buyer agent gets, that's not allowed. That's too open-ended according to the settlement. And it also says that the buyer agent can't get more compensation than the written agreement provides. Like that's the cap, nothing more than that. Okay? So there's two big issues here that I think need to be addressed. One is it's not really clear what exactly is allowed and what isn't. Open-ended is actually open-ended, it's vague and ambiguous. And then secondly, what happens if the seller offers more than the buyer agent can get? Where does the extra money go? Turns out that actually makes a pretty big difference. The settlement doesn't answer that question. Let's take these one at a time. So, man, it can't be open-ended. What does that mean? Well, it doesn't mean you know the number of dollars you're getting paid when you sign the agreement. Because if the commission is 2% or 3%, you don't know what you're going to get paid till the house gets sold. If it's X dollars an hour, you don't know how many hours you're going to work. The only thing that would be literally, you know what you're getting at signing is like a fixed dollar fee number, and I don't think it meant to do only that. So it can't mean this. It could mean that there has to be a cap, like maybe it has to be between 2 and 3%, depending on factor, between some dollar numbers or something. But that would still allow steering. Like imagine a commission agreement that said the agent gets 2% plus whatever the seller offers up to a maximum total compensation of 3%. The seller gets between 2 and 3%, but the buyer agent is still going to want to look for homes that offer commissions of a certain level because they still have a direct incentive to steer toward those homes. So that wouldn't actually fix steering. So if it means that, it doesn't fix the problem. And it could also just mean something else. I don't know what it could mean exactly, but these are not the only possibilities. But this seems like it's doing a lot of work and it should be clear what it means and it's not. Second issue is these excess commissions. So what if the seller offers, say, 3%, but the written agreement says the buyer agent can only get 2%? Well, who gets the extra 1%? It can't be the buyer agent. That's good. But it could be the buyer or the seller or the listing agent. Currently, the answer would be some combination of seller and listing agent, depending on where you are. But it would be much better for incentive purposes in terms of lowering prices and incurring competition if it is the buyer who gets this extra compensation. So I think that's an important tweak as well. So how do you fix this? Right? How do you fix this open-ended problem and the excess compensation problem where the extra money goes? There's basically one overarching strategy I think that works quite well, which is what you want to do is disconnect what sellers are offering from what the buyer agents actually get to keep. If this is the story, if you're a buyer agent, it doesn't matter what seller offers. Your compensation is all about that buyer agent agreement. And that's where the action will happen. You won't have to steer anymore because it won't help you. It takes away your entire reason for doing it. And there's basically two ways to do this. One is sort of de facto separation, where we basically say like any excess commission goes to the buyer. And on top of that, kind of clarifying what exactly is allowed in that buyer agent agreement, to sort of channel things in that direction. So if you require that open-ended means it can't depend on what the seller does in terms of their offering or what they offer to pay, that would basically do the same thing. And this to sort of build off the existing structure of the settlement. You could do this with relatively small changes to the language here and there. That would be impactful, but not huge edits. A second approach is explicitly decoupling. You could say, look, sellers cannot offer cooperating commissions anymore. Or equivalently, you could say buyer agents as fiduciaries of the buyer are not allowed to accept any compensation from the selling party. That would be a different way to kind of get at the same result, but through a different means that might be legally or morally or logistically easier or whatever. And this is what the DOJ proposed, by the way, in their statement of interest in the Nozelek settlement in the Massachusetts case. This is what they're pushing for there. This has the advantage of being a little cleaner and simpler in some ways, but it's a bigger change to the framework of the settlement. Like it's not what the settlement contemplates. So to sum up, in short, if you want an effective settlement that's going to bring down commission rates to something that looks more like the rest of the developed world, you're going to need to end commission-based steering, and you need to encourage buyers to get in the game and to push for lower commissions either by negotiating or by price shopping. The proposed settlement doesn't really quite get there. It's not clear what exactly is allowed. The buyer written agreements are a good step in the right direction, but they don't have enough there to quite make this work and live up to their promise. Incentives aren't quite there because of the lack of clarity, as I mentioned, and the issue with the excess commissions. So the two ways to fix this, as I mentioned, are de facto separation, which would basically involve tweaking the language of the settlement in a couple of sentences, or you could do this through just sort of requiring separation of pay. So sellers pay for sellers' agents, buyers pay for buyers' agents, and do it that way. I will also mention that this could also be done past the settlement. It's not the end of the world and not the end of the negotiation and discussions here. One thing that you could do, for example, like states could adopt mandatory forms for buyer agent agreements, and those agreements could specify who gets the extra compensation, make it buyer, and sort of that you can't have agreements that hinge on what the seller offers in various ways. So there are other ways to get at these same points beyond the settlement itself. All right, I'm out of time, so I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you guys so much. It's been a pleasure.